the goal of a fleet manager or that business is to really understand the impact of downtime, right? Lost production, idle labor, missing contracts, right? So you do all this practice, right? So you put the equipment in place, you have the right operators, but really what matters is game day. So if you have equipment failing during a large contract, or where you're bidding a piece of contract where you have pieces of your fleet down, you're not going to be in a position to win. So for these fleet managers, I would say and agree with you, it's not about the oil change. It's not about replacing tires. It's about positioning your fleet for the unknowns.
Welcome to Agile Talks. I am back up.
The one and only.
The one and only Ryan. Actually, yeah, I just go by one name. I'm like Messi, except Ryan or Pele
Right.
or any
MC.
LeBron.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
We're definitely
Jordan.
getting. I feel like with the growth of this podcast, by the end of the year, you will be there. Like Messi's going to win his second World Cup in a row. Ryan is going to win some type of amazing podcast award.
I'll make up my own award on Canva, and then I'll just put it out there.
We'll 3D print you one.
Oh my goodness, that would be
Yeah.
great. You have made some pretty, like those Christmas trees that you made are pretty
Legit.
cool. They're legit. I think you actually could sell those on the internet if that's all you wanted to do. Okay.
I mean, it's always good to have a backup plan, I guess. Etsy, here we
Yeah.
come.
I think it's something that you can make Joe do. Joe, actually, you know what? When Joe gets back from his trip, you should tell him like, "Hey, Joe, I have had an idea." Okay.
Yes,
I've
we're gonna
had
pivot.
Ryan spin. Yeah, I've had Ryan spin up a website, and we already have 1,000 orders.
I mean, he would probably quit on Monday, I think.
All right. So today, let's talk about the idea of managing the fleet versus managing a machine. So I think it's easy. So I'll actually tell a story here. I have a fairly good family friend. I say family friend. I grew up with the son and played soccer with him my entire life, and he's one of my really good friends.
Okay.
And his dad did run an excavation company. Okay. And the great thing about his excavation company was it was a single person excavation company. He ran this company for 35 years and it was just him. Okay. He did single family homes. His brother was a builder. So he actually, and would build, he was a high end home builder.
Yeah, custom home builder.
So like he would, if they were building an entire neighborhood, it was one by one by one by one. And, always had work. Okay. And he had a cool dump truck. I liked it because of the machines as a child, dump truck, earth mover, he had lots of stuff. And it was easy for him to know what was going on with his machines because he was operating them every single day. Mm-hmm. Now, I also have a very large excavation company near me that I drive by. They went from like some tiny shop to now they have, I don't know, like
Hundreds of pieces of equipment.
Hundreds of pieces of equipment, hundreds of employees, hundreds of pieces of equipment. And I imagine that it's a full-time job for somebody to manage their entire fleet. And I imagine that it's very difficult for them to manage their entire fleet because even if they're dealing, like all of their stuff is Cat or Komatsu or Volvo or whatever it is, okay?
Yeah.
You're still managing hundreds of machines and managing parts for those. And I know this is something that you know a lot about. So is it as much of a nightmare as I imagine it is?
Nightmare is strong. You know how I'm going to try to diffuse this a little bit, right? I would say it's a challenge for sure because just like you were walking through that story, the mix of equipment that a lot of these dealers have on hand are massive. How that equipment is being used is very different. So depending on how the environment, right, the projects that equipment is being used, different things will break. So in many large fleets, it's not just one individual; it's a team kind of maintaining and keeping those vehicles up and running. So I think the opportunity is as technology goes into more and more of this equipment, right? Versus 30 years ago, the operator would say, I'm hearing a funny noise, or I've done so many hours on this job, I probably have to maintenance this part. It was very just kind of feel, right? There was no magic in it. It was just, I know this piece of equipment, I know where to look when there's a problem. Now that we fast forward with all the sensors and the predictive systems with inside this equipment, I would argue it's not either or. Like how great fleet managers work would be that still that instinctive feel now coupled with data to say, okay, where should we be looking before the equipment goes down? And also taking kind of that blended approach should put you in a better position to solve kind of the challenges that you're going to face.
Okay. But I still would imagine that there is a large amount of capital that gets tied up on, right. It's easy to go like, hey, every 10,000 miles for,
Hours. They talk about
yeah.
hours in this world. Yeah.
Okay. So every 10,000 hours, I still feel like they're doing oil changes on those trucks every couple miles. Maybe that's just my hail damage Forerunners. We just do every 5,000 miles with synthetic. But I feel like you got your routine stuff that you can stock and have on the shelf. And it's almost a necessity when you're running a 100 machine fleet. But I also think that there are definitely like, hey, this happens every 3 years parts.
Yeah.
That would put these groups at risk because you're not going to get it approved to keep a panel and parts. But you're up the creek without a paddle. If something happens to it and you don't have it without a panel, you're up the creek without a paddle. If something happens to it. So that's where I get like that. That's what would make me nervous, is going like, I know that once or twice a year, we're going to have something break that I'm going to struggle to get a replacement. And the natural thing is like, well, we should just keep backups of everything, but that's not realistic because you're going to sit on hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of
Millions.
Parts
Usually
inventory.
it's millions. Yeah. It's
Okay.
millions of dollars.
I'm thinking about. I was thinking about like the fleet manager for the 100
Yeah.
part excavator.
So you're touching on a couple really interesting points. So what you're flirting with is downtime, right? So a lot of these fleets, when you buy a new piece of equipment, it is all about kind of the ROI on that equipment and how do we make our money back, right? So when they buy a new piece of equipment, they understand how many hours it's got to be run, how many projects, what the rate is for that piece of equipment in order to make money, right? If they're not making money, they're not going to be in business very long. So the goal of a fleet manager or that business is to really understand the impact of downtime, right? Lost production, idle labor, missing contracts, right? So you do all this practice, right? So you put the equipment in place, you have the right operators, but really what matters is game day. So if you have equipment failing during a large contract, or where you're bidding a piece of contract where you have pieces of your fleet down, you're not going to be in a position to win. So for these fleet managers, I would say and agree with you, it's not about the oil change. It's not about replacing tires. It's about positioning your fleet for the unknowns. So that is the first thing, is what does your actual downtime cost you? And once you understand that, that creates a sense of urgency on how do we respond to it. So if you only have one piece of equipment break down across your 100-piece fleet, not a big deal. But if multiple pieces of equipment continue to break and you have an extended idle time to fix it, whether that's not being able to find the right parts or things come up that were unforeseen that you don't have inventory in, that's what creates the challenge. So just like so many worlds, how do we try to offset that risk? We try to offset that risk by holding a lot of inventory. That's a whole nother conversation that we can have for another time, as far as prediction models versus forecasting versus actually understanding how you can influence that inventory position. That is a whole nother topic. But for parts that come in for unforeseen demand, or they've been obsoleted, I would say there are options out there to position that fleet manager with kind of another host of choices.
So let's ultimately get to, I think, what we want to get to here, which is how does additive solve this? And I know the honest answer is like, well, additive just solves it because you can print new parts that maybe were on like the oh no scenario where I have something break inside of my internal cab that makes it unsafe for my operator to actually operate the machine. So everything else is completely fine, but the entire panel in front of it somehow got smashed or it's just deteriorated. Now I got to replace this $500,000 machine because I can't find a $1,000 part. Or I got to scrap another one, right? There's a whole bunch of different scenarios. So can you just touch on the parts? And I don't want you to get into super detail, but like additives improved significantly in the past couple of years. You could do large form stuff. You could do different materials. So can you kind of just touch on why approaching replacing these types of parts on these big fleets, these big machineries, these fleets, why it's so much easier today than it was 5 years ago?
Wow, that's a big question. So I think, at least from our experience, within the last 3 or 4 years, many within the industry weren't convinced that additive could be of assistance. They didn't believe that it would be an option to source some of these parts from this type of technology. So, the team and I have done a lot to prove people wrong, right? We've gotten a lot of opportunities where it's kind of like, hey, show me. You now have the stage and our attention. Show us what's possible. And, I'm elated to say that we've been able to do that as far as different size parts, different materials, parts functioning in different pieces of the equipment. We've been able to do that. When it comes to kind of making those decisions, you have to remember too, especially when you're in the fleet world, many times you're dealing with unions. So the unions will force a kind of safe work environment versus, your best friend's father. If he's an owner operator and he has one piece of equipment, I mean, we've seen some gnarly solutions where I'm not going to say duct tape, but maybe it's duct tape holding
Duct
things
tape.
together. Right. Duct tape, bandages, zip ties. People love zip ties. Um, that is a very different solution, right? Because in order to keep that piece of equipment, that owner operator is going to do anything possible that he or she can do to keep that out there. For fleet, you have a whole nother list and kind of degree of responsibility to keep that piece of equipment safe and viable. And what we don't realize, because we're not those people in those cabs, I mean, you talk about individuals spending 8, 9, 10, 12 hours in that cab. That really is their office. So in order to keep them safe, keep them happy to some extent, it's important to give them a safe work environment. So I think with inside the cab, that's where we see that, where you think about that equipment being deployed, what it sees, right? Heat, snow, rain, wind, whatever. They get beat up, and they get beat up pretty quick. So how can you refresh that cab to make it more suitable for your employees is a big question. But that union piece is a big one too, where if they deem that piece of equipment not safe or viable, it goes offline until you can find a solution.
And I'm just going to say what Mark won't say because he's way too nice. That really sucks. I didn't even say it in a bad way. I just like, that would suck, right? You're just like this I can't imagine having a $250,000 machine and you're like, hey, Jimmy won't get in it because the
armrest is broke. There's a massive crack in the dash.
And you're like, I can't imagine going to my boss who runs the company and going like, hey, we're gonna have to scrap the bulldozer, and be like, oh, why? Oh, well, the armrest is broken and the dash is cracked, so yeah, we're gonna have to get another machine because we can't get any parts. And that's not a fun concept.
That's the other piece of this too, is that to some extent, a lot of these pieces of equipment have outlasted the original expectation. We talk about hours in this world, and if you keep maintenance on that machine, you're seeing extra longevity in that piece of equipment. So the transmission might be good, the engine might have gone through a rebuild, right? So you may be able to get another 20, 30, 40,000 hours on that piece of equipment, but then some of the, I'll say maybe not mechanical things, the cab, the fenders, the hoods, the things that are maybe part of the safety system or part of the user's interface needs replaced too. And it's so far outside the window of the OEM being responsible for that. That's where I think additive is interesting, right? Is if you're going to make the investment to redo a transmission or rebuild an engine, what are the other things that you can do to give that equipment kind of a second life?
What a beautiful story that is, in a world where it's cheaper if my dishwasher takes a crap for me to just get a new dishwasher than replace any parts in my dishwasher. That if you just take care of your $500,000 dump truck, okay, you just maintain it, it actually will last longer. Now, yeah, you did spend $500,000 on it, but that's besides the point. So one last thing that I quickly want to touch on, because you told me this and I thought it was interesting, that you had a conversation with someone, I believe it was like 2 weeks ago, about how Complete Pivot, how they're thinking of using a tool like Peregrine to solve this specific issue. So give me a 60-second overview of the challenge that they're facing with.
Yeah, so I think additive can be a resort when you're stuck in the corner, right? You have no other options. Once we kind of prove you wrong or prove you right, like additive is a viable solution, then how do we get more methodical and more thoughtful of where we can deploy 3D printed parts inside your fleet or inside that piece of equipment? Additive is kind of like, how do we even get in front of that, right? So if additive right now is being used as kind of the emergency room, Peregrine can be used as like a precursor. So think of it as almost like your family practitioner. Let's go in for a health check. Let's understand what's going on inside our fleet. More specifically, what's going inside our inventory. So you had said, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. Depending on the fleet size, Ryan, typically your inventory levels could be anywhere between kind of 1.5 and $5 million. So you think about the amount of cash, the amount of cash tied up for a lot of these dealers, just with the anticipation that something is going to go wrong. So what we're positioning Peregrine in that use case to be is to understand failure rates, right? Per model, per part, to really understand a breakdown of per machine class, not just, hey, we have 50 bulldozers. What feels right as far as the right inventory position, like really taking the data from the service and maintenance side of that world and then overlaying it with intelligence, where now you're positioning that fleet manager or that service manager with real decisions to say, okay, this piece of equipment is breaking down 4 times more often than this other one, we should really take a look at our inventory position. So very, very excited about that use case for Peregrine, and think it will have some tremendous impact for the dealers.
You're so well spoken. I would have really fumbled that if I tried to explain it. So, all right. Well, I think then the lesson learned for everyone who's made it this far would be, number one, there are options for when that panel or armrest breaks down on the inside. You don't have to, and you're trying to get something from a scrapyard in India or like Russia.
True.
You know, there are options. I'd like to tell you that that's like a joke, but that's a real thing that Mark has told me about, of like, you know, just people have going through scrap yards. So maybe you can avoid that awkward conversation with your boss, where you're going to go tell them that you're going to have to scrap a perfectly good machine because you can't find a $1,000 part. And, you know, the other thing would be, there are new tools coming to the market to help fleet managers and service managers actually manage inventory more intelligently, because I don't want to say that they're not doing it intelligently, but better. You know, that will help them. And Peregrine is, you know, has the ability to do that, but I don't ever want this to be a commercial for Peregrine, because then people will absolutely turn it off. Right. I should just be wearing a Peregrine
commercial,
t-shirt.
An opportunity to reflect, right? That's what I would say. Say, hey, you know, if we did a, you know, half a day exercise to look at our inventory position, how many turns do we see? What is our kind of working capital position? Things like that. And then, do we understand failure patterns? Do we understand kind of the turns that we're getting? Do we understand how we make the decisions to position inventory? Those are all interesting. And if it leads you to a point of saying, I don't know, kind of like in our last podcast, then there might be an opportunity to pause and see what else is out there to help you make better decisions.
Hey, you know what a great way to get a raise is? Go to your boss and go, hey, I just figured out a way to save us $500,000 or $1 million in working capital.
I mean, you could make that pitch, be like, hey, I get a percentage of whatever I save the company. That could be interesting.
Well, now you're thinking like a sales rep. Now you're thinking like a salesperson. That's what salespeople do. Salespeople go like,
it's hard to keep that part of my brain down.
Yeah, can I get a percentage of my bonus based off of that? So, all right. Well, then everybody, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. I know that you're just waiting on bated breath for our next episode. So, I'm all-time quarterback host Ryan. Mark, you want to say bye to everyone?
QB1. There he is, QB1.
QB2.
Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you.